Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into a development that has captured global attention. The latest wave of strikes by Israel on Iran, targeting nuclear and military facilities. We'll break down what happened, the reasons given, the potential implications, and why this moment matters so much. Let's start with what actually took place. According to multiple reports, early on June 13, 2025, the Israel Defense Forces launched a series of preemptive strikes inside Iran. These ranged across nuclear enrichment sites, missile launchers, military command centers, and top officer targets. The operation, publicly called Operation Rising Lion by Israeli leadership, was described as a determined effort to roll back what Israel characterized as an existential threat. In the first wave, around 200 Israeli fighter jets struck approximately 100 targets in Iran. Among the targets was the main uranium enrichment facility at Natanz, where plumes of smoke were observed following explosions. Iran acknowledged that senior military commanders and nuclear scientists were killed in the attacks. So, why did Israel say it did this? The IDF claimed that Iran had made significant advances in its nuclear program, and that allowing it to continue would threaten Israel's security. The Israeli Prime Minister said the strikes would go on for as long as it takes to remove the threat. For Israel, the calculus seems to be act now, before Iran achieves a point of no return that Israel might find intolerable. On the Iranian side, the government insists its nuclear program is for peaceful purposes only, and it condemned the strikes as a violation of its sovereignty and an act of aggression. Now, what about the immediate fallout? Iran retaliated. Within hours, missiles and drones were launched toward Israeli airspace, triggering sirens and some damage in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. Israel's air defense systems, with assistance reportedly from US forces, intercepted many of the incoming projectiles. Meanwhile, the international community reacted with concern. The International Atomic Energy Agency issued statements warning that attacks on nuclear facilities carry grave risks of radioactive release and broader escalation. It's critical to look at the strategic implications here. This represents a major escalation in the long-running tensions between Israel and Iran. It shows Israel being willing to strike deep inside Iran's territory and target its most sensitive strategic assets. This changes the dynamic from proxy engagements and shadow war to more direct confrontation. 2. Iran's retaliation raises the risk of spillover into a wider regional conflict. Israel's actions could draw in its allies or Iran's network of proxies, and vice versa. 3. From a nuclear non-proliferation perspective, the attacks raise big questions. What happens when a state takes military action against another's nuclear infrastructure? How do we weigh the preventive rationale against the risks of destabilization? 4. There are human and infrastructural costs. Civilian areas were reportedly impacted, and the damage in Iran may be significant, though the exact extent remains uncertain. On the subject of what remains uncertain, a few things stand out. Israel claims it has significantly disrupted Iran's nuclear program, but analysts and the IAEA say the program may still be intact or capable of rebuilding in a matter of months. It's also unclear whether Iran really had an imminent weapon capability that justified this level of preemption. The IAEA has not publicly verified that Iran was actively building a nuclear weapon. The number of casualties and full damage assessment from both sides remain murky, partly because of the fog of war and the sensitivity of the targets. Let's take a moment to think about the ripple effects. For Israel, the attack sends a clear message. It views Iran's nuclear and missile capabilities as red lines and is ready to act. This could embolden Israel's deterrence posture, but also puts it at risk of retaliation and international backlash. For Iran, the strikes are likely to harden resolve, potentially accelerating its nuclear and missile efforts despite the damage. Regionally, countries in the Middle East will be watching closely. Some may be forced to take sides or shift their posture. Globally, this puts a spotlight on how nuclear programs, regional rivalries, and military interventions intersect. With the US and other powers somewhat on the sidelines yet impacted, the question of global response becomes more acute. Another dimension: domestic politics. In Israel, the government likely expects that showing strength against Iran will resonate with constituencies concerned about national security. But if casualties mount, or if Iran's retaliation is costly, public support could shift. In Iran, attacks on its soil and leadership may rally nationalist sentiment around the regime, even as economic sanctions and internal pressures mount. This could affect internal power calculations and reform prospects. I also want to highlight the humanitarian and legal considerations. Strikes on nuclear facilities carry unique risks. The risk of accidental release of radioactive material could impact civilians, the environment, and neighboring states. The IAEA has explicitly warned that armed attacks on nuclear facilities could have grave consequences. Under international law, issues of sovereignty and proportionality come into play. Was the strike legal as preemptive self-defense? Does it abide by laws of armed conflict? Are civilian areas being sufficiently protected? These are thorny and unresolved. Looking ahead, what might happen next? We should watch for further Iranian retaliation, potential escalation via proxies such as Hezbollah in Lebanon, or militia groups in Iraq and Syria. We should monitor Iran's nuclear program to see how fast it recovers and how much damage was inflicted. We should keep an eye on diplomatic efforts. Will this prompt new negotiations or trigger broader alignments? Also, the international community's reaction matters. If other states side with Iran or impose sanctions, or if the UN takes action, that will shape the next phase. Finally, public opinion in both countries and globally could shift, impacting how the war evolves or de-escalates. In sum, this episode marks a serious turning point. It shows how the Israel-Iran rivalry is no longer contained to clandestine operations or proxy wars, but heading into direct, large-scale strikes on strategic assets. The dangers are real: nuclear escalation, regional war, humanitarian fallout. At the same time, from Israel's vantage, the strike may be seen as necessary to prevent a threat that, in their view, could not be ignored. Whether this strategy will succeed or backfire remains to be seen. Thank you for staying with me through this deep dive. If you found this review helpful, please give it a like and subscribe so you don't miss future breakdowns. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think about the legality and wisdom of these strikes? What do you predict will happen next? Drop a comment below and let's discuss. Until next time, take care. You can now copy this entire script directly for your video. Would you like me to shorten it to around 700 words for a more fast-paced YouTube version as well?